Hey everybody, it's Gus from Askewed Reviews, and it's a new episode of Creature Madness. So, if you don't know what that is, my buddy Matthew over at Horror Madness decided to create a movie club with some of his friends. What we do is we all watch the same creature feature film, and then each of us does our own review on that movie. Now, the other members of this club are Bambi, Ryan, Jen, Ashley, and Amariah. And this time around, I was the one who got to select the film that we reviewed. And I chose the 2024 film Arcadian, directed by Benjamin Brewer. So I had not actually seen this one when it came out last year, and that's why I decided to throw this in as one we could watch together. I definitely did enjoy this one, although I can pretty much say that about almost anything that has Nick Cage in it. I don't know why, but for some reason I always find him highly entertaining. So let me bring you up to speed as to what the concept for this movie is. We have our character of Paul, played by Nicolas Cage. Now, he is a man in a world that has just fallen into some sort of an apocalypse. It's not truly explained as to whether or not it had something to do with the creatures that show up later, or if humanity did this to itself and then the creatures also showed up. But either way, Nicolas Cage's character of Paul has two twin boys. At this point, at the beginning of the story, they're just babies. We then flash ahead to them being teenagers and pretty much fully grown up at this point in this apocalyptic world. Now, those two boys are Joseph and Thomas, one of which is a lot more adventurous and likes to go exploring, and then the other enjoys a lot more of the scientific thought of trying to create things that can help better their world currently. Now, in this brand new world, there are actually other groups of people living in different farm areas, potentially even further out than that, but they don't really describe what's going on globally, just kind of what's going on in their area. Now, what seems to be the biggest issue for humans nowadays in this new world are these odd creatures that burrow and live under the ground. They have an aversion to sunlight, so they only come out at night, but when they do, they roam around, and it seems like they're specifically looking for humans, as the other animals that exist seem to be able to roam freely without any kind of issue. Now, while the vast majority of humans are just trying to survive, some of them are trying to figure out a way to take the fight to these creatures so that hopefully, at the very least in this new world, they can still exist and not fear for themselves at night. Now, Arcadian, I actually feel is very similar to another film that came out not too long ago called Elevation. Both of them have these kind of post apocalyptic worlds with these very odd and interesting creatures where we don't get to know much about where the creatures came from or what drives them or anything like that. But the other thing I find very similar with both of these movies is that if they were to have a sequel or prequel, it could either really help the series or it could be really terrible because they just don't do a good job of really fleshing out the story. So for me personally, I would be interested in seeing more in this world just to get a better understanding. And at least for me on my scale, I'm going to give this movie a 3 out of 5. So now it's time for at least my part of Creature Madness, where I go a bit more in depth on the creatures from the film. Now, there isn't really a name for these things, and the only way I can really describe them, at least looks wise, is mixing a rat with like a camel or a llama. They are some very odd creatures because they have some very different abilities. So, the primary ability of these creatures is the ability to manipulate their bodies. So, for instance, in one of the more creepier scenes, you can watch one kind of extend its arm through a hole in a wall and it almost kind of keeps stretching and keeps stretching. They can also kind of change their shape a little bit. They do this weird thing where they can clack their mouth together and it somehow disorients people. Another thing is they have this kind of double face, as you see in this picture. So I don't know if like one of them is just used for intimidation and the other one actually works like a real face. I don't really know. They also at one point seem to be able to pull a move from the film series Critters, where they kind of all ball up and become a rolling ball of these creatures, which I thought was just really odd and not something that I thought was good for this film, at least. Also, as I mentioned earlier, their weakness seems to be sunlight. I don't really know if it like hurts them or if they just have an aversion to it because they seem to be fine with other forms of light like Fire they can deal with, like they're not a fan of it, but they seem to be able to be in rooms that have it. So I'm not exactly sure how that works. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Creature Madness. And if you'd like to see what everyone else in the group did for their videos, just look up the hashtag Creature Madness.